HOA Karen sued me for keeping her off my ranch. She had no idea. I'm a retired attorney. The envelope was thick. Too thick for a regular letter. James Calder set down his coffee and turned it over in his hands. The return address was a law office 2 towns over. He hadn't spoken to a lawyer in 11 years, not since he'd hung up his own briefcase for good. He opened it standing at the kitchen counter, still in his work boots, dust from the fence line still on his jeans. Civil complaint, trespass, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Plaintiff, Donna Whitfield. James read it twice. Then he laughed, short and disbelieving, and set the papers down like they might bite him. Donna Whitfield. The woman who ran the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association like it was her own personal kingdom. The woman who had walked onto his ranch 3 weeks ago without asking, camera in hand, taking pictures of his fence posts for violations. The woman he had calmly, politely asked to leave. Now she was suing him for that. He looked at the date on the complaint. He had 20 days to respond. James picked up his coffee again, sat down at the table, and read the whole thing from the beginning, slower this time, the way he used to read every filing in 31 years of practicing law. Donna Whitfield had no idea who she had just sued. Before this story goes any further, tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with someone who thought a little bit of authority gave them the right to walk onto your land, into your life, like the rules didn't apply to anyone but you? If this story is already speaking to something you've lived through, you're not alone, and I think you're going to want to see how far this one goes. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, because there are more stories like this one coming, and I'd hate for you to miss them. James Calder had moved to Cedar Ridge 14 months earlier, after his wife Margaret passed. They'd talked about this kind of place for years. 40 acres, a creek along the back boundary, enough quiet that you could hear the wind change direction. He'd bought it alone, because by the time the paperwork closed, Margaret had already been gone 8 months, and there was no one left to talk about it with. He didn't tell people in town what he used to do for a living. It wasn't a secret exactly. It just never came up. He'd retired from a downtown firm in the city. 31 years of civil litigation, the last 12 of them as a named partner. He'd argued in front of appellate courts. He'd taken depositions that lasted 3 days. None of that mattered out here. Out here, what mattered was whether the fence held, and whether the well pump was still working, and whether you remembered to close the gate behind the cattle. He liked it that way. The trouble started on a Tuesday in March, when Donna Whitfield's white SUV pulled up the gravel drive uninvited, and she got out with a clipboard and a camera and walked straight onto his property. Like she owned it. James had been repairing a section of fence near the front pasture. He watched her come, hands on her hips, taking photos of the fence posts before she'd said a single word to him. "Can I help you?" he'd asked, setting down his post driver. "I'm Donna Whitfield, president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association," she said, like the title alone should have stopped him in his tracks. "Your fencing is out of compliance. Association bylaws require uniform post height and approved staining. I'm documenting it for the file." James had looked at his fence. It was sturdy. It kept his cattle in. It had taken him 3 weekends to build, and he was proud of it. "This isn't an HOA property," he said evenly. "I checked the deed before I built it. This parcel was never annexed into Cedar Ridge." Donna's smile had gone thin. "We're updating the boundary maps. It will be included. It isn't included yet." James kept his voice calm, the same voice he used to use in mediation rooms when a deal was about to fall apart. "And until it is, I'd ask you not to come onto my land without permission." She stood there a moment, camera still raised, like she was deciding whether his request even applied to her. "I'll be in touch," she said, and walked back to her SUV. James thought that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived, formal and threatening, claiming violations he didn't have, on land that wasn't hers to govern. James wrote back politely, citing the recorded plat map, the parcel number, the date his property had been excluded from the association's jurisdiction. He thought facts would settle it. He didn't yet understand that for Donna Whitfield, this had stopped being about fences a long time ago. What James didn't know, what almost no one in Cedar Ridge knew, was that Donna had spent the last 6 years rebuilding her own sense of control, 1 inch at a time. Her husband had left without warning, taking most of their savings and leaving her the house and a mortgage she could barely cover. The HOA presidency was the only place left where her opinion mattered, where people had to listen when she spoke, where a clipboard and a title gave her back some of what she'd lost. Every rule she enforced was a small attempt to prove the world still made sense, that order still existed, that she still had a place where she counted. She didn't see James as a man defending his land. She saw him as one more person who thought he could ignore her. So when he sent her that polite, fact-filled letter, citing law she didn't fully understand, in a tone that felt, to her exactly, like being dismissed all over again, something in her hardened. She filed the lawsuit 3 weeks later. James read every page of the complaint at his kitchen table, the same table where he and Margaret used to do the crossword on Sunday mornings. The second mug, the one with the chipped rim that had always been hers, still sat on the shelf above the sink. He hadn't moved it. He hadn't used it either. He picked up his phone and called an old colleague from the firm, just to talk it through, the way he used to before he wrote any major filing. "You're really retired." "Calder," his old colleague said, half laughing. "You don't have to do this yourself." "I know," James said, "but I want to." He spent that evening at the table with a yellow legal pad, the kind he hadn't bought in over a decade, writing out the timeline in his own hand. The day she trespassed, the day the certified letter arrived, the recorded plat map number. The county clerk's office where he'd verified, twice, that his parcel had never been part of Cedar Ridge's governing boundary. He wasn't angry. That surprised him a little. He'd expected anger. Instead, he felt something closer to calm, the same steady clarity he used to feel walking into a courtroom knowing he'd done the work, knowing the facts were on his side. The next morning, he drove to the county recorder's office and requested certified copies of the original plat filing. The clerk behind the counter, a younger woman named Renee, recognized his name from somewhere she couldn't place. "You used to practice law?" she asked, sliding the documents across the counter. "A long time ago," James said. "Doesn't look like it's the kind of thing you forget how to do," she said, and there was something almost like a smile in it. James drove home with the documents on the seat beside him, and for the first time since the lawsuit arrived, he allowed himself to think 2 steps ahead, not about winning exactly, but about what would happen to Donna Whitfield once the truth came out in a courtroom, in front of a judge, in a county where everyone would eventually hear about it. He didn't enjoy that thought as much as he expected to. That evening, sitting on the porch with the documents in a folder beside him, he saw a truck slow down on the road past his property line. It idled there a moment longer than it needed to, then moved on. James watched it go, frowning slightly. It wasn't Donna's white SUV. It was someone else's truck, someone he didn't recognize. And the next morning, when he checked his mailbox, there was a second envelope waiting, this one with no return address at all. The second envelope had no return address, but James knew before he opened it that it wasn't from a court clerk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead. Just 6 typed lines telling him that people in Cedar Ridge didn't appreciate outsiders who thought they were above the rules, and that he should consider settling before things got worse for him. He read it twice, the same way he'd read the lawsuit. And then he did something he hadn't done in years. He drove into town, walked into the sheriff's office, and placed the letter on the counter along with a photocopy for the file. "I want this on record," he said. "Whatever happens next, I want it documented." The deputy behind the counter, a young man named Tom Reyes, looked at the letter, then at James. "You're the fella Donna Whitfield suing, aren't you?" "That's right. My mother's on that HOA board," Tom said quietly. "She didn't want any part of this. Donna's been different since her husband left. Folks have been giving her room, maybe more room than they should have." James nodded slowly. It didn't excuse anything, but it gave the whole thing a shape he could understand. Donna Whitfield wasn't a monster. She was a woman holding on to the only thing that still made her feel like she mattered. And she had decided, somewhere along the way, that James's quiet refusal to bend was a personal insult instead of a simple boundary. It didn't change what he had to do. It only changed how he felt while doing it. Over the following weeks, James built his case the way he'd built hundreds of them in his old life, except this time there was no associate pulling files. For him, no paralegal organizing exhibits. Just him, the kitchen table, and Margaret's empty mug watching over him from the shelf. He requested the certified plat map showing his parcel had never been annexed into Cedar Ridge. He pulled the county's original ordinance from 19 years ago, the one that explicitly excluded his land and 3 neighboring parcels from the association's jurisdiction. He printed the certified letter Donna had sent him, full of violations that didn't exist on a property the HOA had no authority over in the first place. And he installed 2 trail cameras at his gate, quietly, the same week the second envelope arrived. 3 nights later, the cameras caught something. Donna Whitfield's white SUV, parked at the edge of his property line at 11 at night, her shape moving along the fence with a flashlight, photographing posts that weren't even on his land anymore. They belonged to the county easement. James watched the footage twice, feeling something settle in his chest. Not triumph, just clarity. He didn't confront her. He simply added the footage to his file. The trial date arrived on a gray Thursday in May. The county courthouse was small, the kind of building where everyone in the gallery seemed to know everyone else, and where the bailiff still called the docket by hand. James wore the same charcoal suit he'd worn to his last case before retiring, the one Margaret had picked out for him at a department store that didn't exist anymore. Donna arrived with her attorney, a sharp young man named Carl Easton, and 2 members of her board sitting behind her like a small, nervous entourage. She wore her HOA blazer with the embroidered pin on the lapel, like it carried some kind of weight in a county courtroom. "Mr. Calder," Judge Patricia Renner said, looking over her glasses. "Do you have counsel present? I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." A small ripple moved through the gallery. Easton's mouth twitched, something close to a smile. "Please state your background for the record." James Calder, retired attorney, 31 years of civil litigation practice, the last 12 as a named partner, member of the state bar since 1990. The smile slid off Easton's face like water off glass. Donna's spine went rigid. Easton opened with confidence anyway, the way young lawyers often do when they haven't yet learned what a long silence in a courtroom actually means. He painted James as a difficult newcomer, unwilling to cooperate with reasonable community standards, a man hiding behind property lines while a respected community leader simply tried to maintain order. When it was James's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He laid the documents on the table one at a time, the way he always had: the certified plat map, the original county ordinance excluding his parcel, the certified letter from Donna citing violations on land she had no authority over. "Your Honor, my property has never been part of Cedar Ridge's governing boundary, At no point has the association had jurisdiction over this land. He opened a folder. I also have footage from security cameras installed at my gate, showing MS Whitfield on my property at night on 3 separate occasions after she had already been asked in person to stay off the land. Judge Renner reviewed the stills in silence. Donna's face had gone from composed to pale. MS Whitfield, the judge said, "Is this you in these photographs?" "I was documenting infractions," Donna said, her voice tighter than before. "For the file, on a property outside your association's jurisdiction at 11 o'clock at night." Donna didn't answer. James continued, quiet and even. "I'd also like to submit a recording. A neighbor's outdoor security system, with permission, captured a phone conversation in which MS Whitfield discussed her intentions toward me." Easton stood. "Your Honor, it was recorded on the neighbor's own property with their consent in a single-party consent state." James said, "It's admissible. The recording was brief." Donna's voice, sharp and certain, telling someone on the other end that James thought he could just ignore the rules like everyone else, and that she'd make sure he learned otherwise. The courtroom went still. Judge Renner looked at Donna for a long moment, and something in her expression softened, just slightly, in a way James recognized. Not approval, recognition. The judge had seen this story before. A person who had lost control of one part of their life, trying to claw it back somewhere else, at someone else's expense. MS Whitfield. The judge said, not unkindly, "Do you have any documentation showing your association had jurisdiction over Mr. Calder's land?" Easton shuffled through his folder, increasingly slower. "We believe the boundary maps were in the process of being updated, Your Honor. That's not documentation. That's the intention." Judge Renner closed the folder in front of her. "Counselor, your client trespassed on private property she had no authority over after being directly asked not to. I'm dismissing the complaint in its entirety with prejudice." Donna's hand gripped the edge of the table. "I was trying to maintain order for the whole neighborhood. You were trying to control something that wasn't yours to control." The judge said quietly, "There's a difference, and I think you already know that." James didn't smile. He felt, instead, something closer to sadness, watching a woman who had clearly been fighting a much older battle than the one over his fence posts. The judge granted his counterclaim for trespass, awarding him modest damages and his court costs, along with a no-contact order requiring Donna to stay off his property entirely. No public spectacle, no headlines, just a quiet, final ruling, the kind James had written 1,000 times in his old life and rarely thought twice about. Until now, when it was his own name on the order. Outside the courthouse, Donna's board members didn't speak to her. James caught a glimpse of her sitting alone on a bench near the parking lot, her blazer pin catching the gray afternoon light, looking smaller than she had in the courtroom. He almost walked over. He didn't. 3 weeks later, Tom Reyes told him Donna had stepped down from the HOA quietly, with no announcement, no farewell mention in the newsletter. She'd put her house up for sale not long after. James never spoke about the case again, not to neighbors, not at the feed store, not at church. He went back to mending fences and feeding cattle and sitting on his porch in the evenings. One night that autumn, he reached up to the shelf above the sink without quite thinking about it, and took down Margaret's old mug, the one with the chipped rim, the one that hadn't moved in 14 months. He filled it with coffee and set it across from his own at the table. It wasn't about winning anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about remembering that some quiet was worth defending,